Welcome to Perspectives in Adventist Education. I'm your host, Stephen Brawley, Director of Secondary Education and Accreditation at the North American Division. Adventist education started in the late 1800s and has grown to operate programs from early childhood, elementary, secondary, and university levels, becoming the largest Protestant private school system in the world. Our graduates have become prominent thought leaders in all fields. Yet, few outside of the system know who we are and what we do. This series will seek out current voices to share how we are facing educational questions with an Adventist perspective. Let's join Levi Whitcombe, Associate Superintendent for the Office of Education at the Texas Conference, as he interviews Dustin Young, talking about how to support students with relational struggles.
Hi, my name is Levi Whitcombe. I'm an Associate Superintendent in the Texas Conference, and I'm here joined by Dr. Dustin Young. Dr. Young, introduce yourself.
Thank you. I am an assistant professor at Andrews University. I also get to work with the International Center for Trauma Education and Care for higher education directives and added initiatives. And then I get to work with School Consultation, which is a program that pushes into schools, helps with social emotional and school counseling and school social workers. So we get to have some in-school social work interns in there. Mm-hmm. I have background in clinical social work. I've worked many years as a therapist in rural community mental health settings or residential. And I get to hang out with some of the kids that maybe would be getting into trouble at school, in the classrooms. Mm-hmm. They might already have some probation charges. Those would be my clientele.
Okay.
And then I just recently moved into that assistant professor role at Andrews.
Oh, okay. Now our Adventist parents are going, well, social emotional, hold on now. My kid's perfect. Well, there is a few things. So what are the common things that you see within our student population within the Adventist perspective, as opposed to maybe you see in public school or other school settings?
Oh, that's a good question. Within that setting, when we talk about social and emotional health, we're looking at not perfection, because none of us are perfect.
Sure.
But we're looking at healthy, safe interactions, both socially, peers, even kids to parents. That's a social dynamic. And then emotions. How much do I know about my emotions? Oftentimes as young kids, we learn ABCs, we learn 1, 2, 3. How many times did you learn the building blocks of emotions and how they work and chemically how they're designed? Mm-hmm. Sometimes we learn that in bio. But when we're looking at that area, social emotional health incorporates and encompasses all of it.
So is this a conversation parents should be having? And if so, like what age, when is it okay to talk about these heavy feelings?
Oh, I think at any age.
Okay.
I often use a term with my students of when you're learning skills or conversations surrounding emotions, you can either age it up or age it down. And so it may be the type of language we use, but young kids need this conversation as early as they begin to speak. Mm-hmm. And sometimes we learn emotions such as shame before we're ever verbal. And shame is different than guilt. Being shame or guilt is I did something bad.
Sure.
And shame is I am something bad.
Yep.
And so that element of we can often feel that emotion, but even as we try to describe it to people, we may go, it's like we don't have the words, but our body knows it.
Yeah, your body does know it. That's spot on. I heard someone say one time that guilt is informative and shame is not. Shame is not a biblical concept, right? That's an after the fall kind of emotion.
Yeah.
Now, as parents, we see the teachers, and we understand that they have a threefold functionality. They are the teacher, but they are also the parent and the pastor. How can I, as a parent, go to the teachers, go to the administration, and embolden them to speak on these social emotional issues?
I would add that they are also the counselor.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
Because more often do I have educators approach me as a mental health professional and say, I have this kid that this is happening or this is what they're saying in class They're talking about themselves this way. What do I do? And as a parent, you can embolden educators, one, of support them, support them to talk about emotions embedded into classes, embedded into content. Teachers don't need just one more class to teach.
Yep.
And so how do we design the emotional discussion in Bible, in math? I needed it in math all the time, how to handle my emotions with math. But also history. How did we see that? Because one of the things that when we add that layer of social, emotional, and relational health, it makes that concept humanized. As opposed to, yeah, that was in Bible times, they were perfect. Or, that someone else can handle that. Or history, yeah, that's boring. But when we become able to humanize it, then students see themselves in it. And it's more at home and more practiced.
No, I agree. Classroom teacher for a long time, and the more real, the more you can feel the subject, the more you understand the subject. So is that also true, that we embolden, as parents, we should feel emboldened to talk with our young people about these issues as opposed to tamping them down?
I think having the conversation is vital.
Okay.
How we have that conversation takes sometimes weighing in of what are my perspectives on it. But I do think that the power comes in when we start talking about it, as opposed to trying to hold it together or look the way we think others expect us to, or just, my favorite, when you're angry, how helpful is it that someone goes, just calm down.
Right. Oh, okay. Well, then I'm fixed. I'm
I'll
done.
tell you how I'll calm down. It's more along those lines of what's going on behind this. What's happening? I'm noticing you're glaring at me. Your fists are clenched. What's happening behind this? And sometimes that's simply giving the words to kids. But yes, have this conversation, be clumsy in it, practice it. But it's really trauma and mental health concerns thrive in silence and darkness and secrets. And so if we're not talking about it, we're fueling the risk of harm.
That's really good. Yeah, that's great. You talked a little bit earlier about feeling it in your body. So can you kind of circle back to that for a second? And what does that actually mean for a young person?
So for a young person, one of the things that we recognize is that we are born with a fully developed amygdala. The amygdala is protected deep in your brain, and it's also a bit like a gas pedal. And so I am born with a fully developed gas pedal, and my frontal lobe, which is the brake system of thinking through problem solving, maybe thinking 2 to 3 steps ahead, cause and effect, making some judgment, while it's becoming developed through teen years and into your 20s, oftentimes they say mid to late 20s is that process. So what's happening is I feel that drive, that fight, flight, freeze. I feel it. It also is actually, memory is funky. It is embedded in our body in different ways to where I may feel a response of fight, get out of here, this isn't safe. I might not know why. And so I act on those things. But our brake system, that frontal lobe, isn't fully developed until mid to late 20s. And so what we're building off of is, one, emotional responses, physiological responses. And what we also know is that here's the funky part of how we are created. It's not funky, it's pretty amazing. Is that when you were being developed in your mom's womb, future generations, so we go up to 3 that element of 3 generations is impacted. I've heard that somewhere in the Bible of sins of our fathers' fathers. This is how it also is embedded into us. If your grandmother was really stressed, or poverty, which is incredibly stressful, or crisis, severe chronic crisis, looking at those things, that is embedded down to a cellular level. And so we look at that. That isn't hopeless, though. Let me stress that post-traumatic growth is a real thing. God planned for that broken world, and that we would have generational trauma happening or generational impacts. He also, I think, said, oh, okay, I see what you're doing, Satan. Let me show you what I can do with this. It's not perfect, not yet.
Yeah.
But this is how it gets embedded into that.
You mentioned post-traumatic growth. I imagine parents are sitting here listening and go, oh, okay, I've experienced that. I know my family has. And then you look back to your own child and go, ooh, okay, this feels too big. So help. Where is it? And how do I get it?
I would say just starting somewhere, whether that's, again, we learn differently. Everybody is different in ways of learning or interest. You may start with a podcast about this, or going, to our favorite research, Dr. Google, and saying, what is this thing called post-traumatic growth? How do we start to look at this? Because we aren't taught about emotions, or even sometimes we're not taught about how to make friends and how to have healthy relationships. What's a safe relationship? And so looking at how do we find those resources, how do we build them? The other element is you can look at, one of my favorite resources is, I'm going to mess this up, findhelp.org, I believe.
Okay.
If you're hunting for counseling, other resources, again, starting locally, or if you have insurance coverage, there's a number on the back of that card for finding things like this. Not everyone goes to a counselor. Sometimes it's a mentor, sometimes it is family therapy or family events that are trained at how do we build a deeper relationship. Starting somewhere and recognizing, again, growth is a process both for parents and for kids. It's not just a kid thing.
Right.
We're all growing up together.
As an Adventist parent, you're giving me permission to seek out help. That's okay?
Please.
Okay, fair enough.
There's a reason that we talk, even in the Bible, about seeking counsel. That's not only from certain individuals. But what can happen with a counselor is sometimes it's a space that you know that person is coming to be in your corner. Doesn't mean they always agree with you or you like what they're saying, but they're there to help you grow and heal. And so that space is really a powerful healing process.
Take a moment to talk directly to the parents listening about what you hope their takeaway is from our time today.
I think the biggest takeaway is, one, give yourself some grace. Remind yourself that even as a parent, whether you've messed up or you're the perfect one, which last I checked, nobody is perfect, so we all fall in that club. But giving yourself some grace and permission to grow, to be learning, and be learning about emotions, be learning about relationships. And the other thing is just have that conversation. You may stutter and stumble and mess up and have all of that struggle, but have the conversation with your kids about emotions and what are healthy emotions and how do you connect with people who are healthy, and tell people when you feel unsafe. Because it's really funky that when we get into trauma or we've had events, sometimes that internal compass is really hard and we may be drawn to unsafe, but we want to keep learning. I think that's the biggest thing. Have the conversation, give yourself some grace for growing with your kids.
Amazing. Dr. Young, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
This is Stephen Brawley, your host. Thanks for listening. Join us again next time as we explore more perspectives in Adventist education.
An Adventist Learning Community Podcast.